So President Trump posting about the GDP number that we just got out less than 30 minutes ago. Here's what he wrote on Truth Social. Second quarter GDP just out 3%. Way better than expected. Too late. Who does he mean? I'm kidding. Must now lower the rate. No inflation. Let people buy and refinance their homes. So final thoughts. Look, today is the Fed meeting. This is the conclusion of the Fed meeting for 2 days. Decision at 2, press conference at 2:30. There's going to be questions from reporters, Adam.
You better believe it.
To Powell about why they're not cutting rates yet.
Well, especially since we had inflation this morning that was lower than expected. Only 2%. The estimate was for 2.2. So to the president's point, we have growth at 3%. We have inflation down at 2%. That is Goldilocks. It's the best of all worlds. And I think that certainly paves the way for the Fed to actually do what it should have done a long time ago, and that's begin to cut rates again.
So it is yet another day where the experts and so-called economists are wrong yet again about Trump's economy and the impact that tariffs are supposedly supposed to have, because as you heard there in the opening clip today, the GDP report for quarter 2 has released. The expected and forecasted numbers were between 2.3 to 2.6% growth in quarter 2. Instead, we saw a whopping 3% GDP growth in the second quarter. And there's a lot to break down about this. We'll kind of go into the details of this number. But first and foremost, I want to state the obvious, which is this confirms that thus far, we have not seen a tariff-induced recession like many people were claiming and telling us would be happening by now. And I once again want to say, as we actually said in the last video, you need to hold people accountable for this, okay? Go back to all of these experts, these pundits, these analysts. Look what they were saying in April around Liberation Day. Look especially at what a lot of Democrats were telling you would happen by now. Look at the situation in our economy now. You'll rapidly find out none of these people are correct, yet instead of revising themselves, instead of stating that they were wrong or incorrect, they simply just continue to shift the goalposts. So I just want to remind everyone again, we're supposed to be in an economic crash. We're supposed to be in a recession. We're supposed to be having massive runaway inflation. None of those things are occurring, yet these people are still trying to say, haha, we were right about Trump's tariffs, when they're objectively not. So we'll break all of these numbers down for you guys in today's video. First though, folks, as usual, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing here, guys, is not only the best way to support our videos, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, so this strong GDP growth, again, remember that the formal definition of a recession is 2 negative quarters of GDP growth. Now, keep in mind, they actually revised this under Joe Biden to suddenly say that was not a recession, because I think 2022 or 2023, you actually saw 2 negative quarters, but they said, no, that's not a recession because of this or that, right? But, you know, you could fully expect that if you saw another negative quarter here in a quarter 2, they would say we are in a recession, and they'd probably be right, because again, that is the formal definition, but instead you are not seeing that. As a matter of fact, as is pointed out here, you're not just seeing strong economic GDP growth, but that's coming with things like income growth and a huge reduction in government spending, notes the National Economic Council director. Take a listen here for yourself.
You know, I think if there were a beauty contest for GDP releases, that this July would probably be very close to the top of the list of the early betting, because it got everything for everybody. There's really strong growth, really strong income growth. We've got a huge reduction in government spending, 5% drop in government spending, now 70,000 fewer federal employees, and we've got 127 billion in tariffs. And so the story, the anti-Trump story, has been that we're going to have a recession or a depression because of the tariffs, which are going to jack up prices and cause consumers to run for the exits. And in fact, every single thing about this GDP release has shown strength. And then the final thing that I like to see in a release, and this is why I'm saying it's really a beauty contest level release, is if you look at it, if you then say, oh, well, next quarter is going to even be better than this, are there reasons to think that? And there are, because if you look at one of the weird little blips in the data, there was a big decline in, say, factory spending, and that was ahead of the big beautiful bill because people were waiting for that to pass so they could expense. And so there's going to be a huge pent-up demand for factory spending in the third quarter, and so you got to be starting to pencil in a 4% number for that quarter.
And we'll talk more about the details of this GDP report in a second, but I also want to note here the question of inflation. But before we continue this video, a brief word from today's sponsors. Have you ever caught yourself reaching for a bad habit without even thinking about it? Maybe it's out of stress, boredom, or just wanting to fit in. Well, that's where Fume comes in. It's not about quitting, it's about replacing. Fume is the award-winning sponsor of today's video, and they offer a simple and enjoyable way to break away from bad habits while still having something satisfying to reach for. We're talking about no vapor, no nicotine, just pure flavor. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that delivers great taste without any harmful chemicals. Instead of inhaling vapor, you simply breathe in natural, non-toxic flavors that satisfy the craving without the downside. It's great for the oral fixation and fidgeting, whether you're looking to keep your hands busy, curb those urges. Fume's premium design is built for both flavor and function. It is, of course, sleek, portable, and built to last, designed with a high-quality build and sleek aesthetic. Fume feels premium in your hand and is easy to take anywhere, whether you're at work, traveling, or just relaxing at home. And of course, it won't set off any smoke alarms there. You can personalize it. My go-to flavor there is crisp mint. It's super refreshing, but Fume offers a ton of flavors, so you will never get bored, and there's certainly something for everyone. So the only question now is, in the fall coming up now, in the rest of 2025, are you ready to make the good habit changes in your life? Well, over 500,000 people have already made the switch to Fume as part of their habit change journey. And if you try it, if you're ready to try it for yourself, now is the time. For a limited time, if you order the Journey Pack using my code VinceDow, you'll get a free Fume topper. I have them right here. They're an awesome accessory to level up your experience. So if you're ready, click the link at tryfume.com/VinceDow or scan the QR code on my screen to get yours today. Because we're being told by Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve that the entire reason they refuse to lower interest rates is because, oh, the tariffs are going to cause inflation, or some have even floated the word stagflation, which is a economic phenomena defined by three things. That means high inflation, high unemployment, and stagnant economic growth. Well, I think thus far you can see we've had none of those things. We do not have high unemployment. According to the Federal Reserve's own metrics, 4%, 4.2% is fine. It's not considered high, right? We obviously do not have high inflation, at least what they were claiming, right? It's in the 2s to 3s. And we do not, obviously by the GDP report, have stagnant economic growth, because guess what? The economy grew. So with all of that in mind, I want to note to you here that not only do you see high GDP growth, not only do you see income growth and all these things, but the GDP price index is only 2%, and we have an economy growing at 3%. So in other words, you have economic growth happening faster than the pace of inflation, which defies everything the Federal Reserve is telling us is happening, and hence justifying their interest rate decision. So just another thing here to keep in mind as we're told, inflation, despite the fact that, well, it's not really happening, is it? Take a listen.
Again, GDP, this is the first read of the second quarter, coming in at 3%. That is better than expected, 2.4%. I want to bring in Adam Johnson. Markets are certainly watching this, right?
Yeah, Goldilocks, because I would add to that, Cheryl, that the GDP price index was only 2%, and the expectation was 2.2. In other words, we have an economy growing at, what do you say, 3%? We have inflation at 2%. That's the best of both worlds. So I'm very positive on that report, at least in the moment.
So I once again asked the Jerome Powell, how can you justify keeping interest rates so high at some of the highest rates in the Western world? Like you look at Switzerland, many European nations, Japan, they all have interest rates that are like 0.5 to 1%. The US has 4. What is the justification or reason for this? You say it's because of high inflation. Inflation is lower than economic growth. You say it's stagflation, but not one of the three characteristics of stagflation are happening in our economy. It's insane and it's ridiculous. And by the way, on the very question of why is there not more investment currently happening in the economy, which we'll show you in a second, a lot of the left-wingers and anti-Trump critics are trying to bring up about this inflation report. We'll actually address that point here in a second. What about the inflation? What about the interest rates, right? Have you not considered that may potentially be a reason why investment is sort of at this standstill? Because people are waiting for the Federal Reserve to make a decision, right? People are not going to want to refinance or take out loans or invest or do very little when everyone just kind of waiting for the economy to take off. But they can't do that, obviously, because why? Because of this fool Jerome Powell, who is sabotaging our economy. And despite his best efforts, okay, to the contrary, the economy is still doing well in spite of that. So Donald Trump puts out the statement here saying second quarter GDP growth is just out 3%, way better than expected. Again, the forecasted number was 2.3 to 2.6. Too late, must now lower the rate, referring there to Jerome Powell. No inflation, let people buy and refinance their homes. Now, all of that in mind, you have here even CNBC noting that at 3% with the market at new highs, we have not seen inflation go up. None of the horrible things that we were told ought to be happening by now because of tariffs, because of Liberation Day have happened, which not only, again, disproves all the Democrats, disproves all the Trump critics who told us this was the end of the world, but further really raises questions about what's going on at the Federal Reserve. So there's 2 points to be had here, but nonetheless, take a listen.
The left and people that don't like the president and don't want things to work. And, like Senator Elizabeth Warren will come on and say, inflation's out of control and the economy is getting killed by what's happening by these tariffs. This 3% with the market at new highs and really we haven't seen inflation, go up back to 3%. Maybe it will this week. Maybe we'll see it. But none of these horrible things have happened, but they still talk like it's happening. It's amazing.
Well, there's an important lesson there. Don't pick a congressman to be your money manager. That's what I would say. But in the end, Congress has their own reasons to point out certain things. And the Democrats, of course, as you pointed out, really don't want to see the current administration have some success. But there's no doubt that this is some success. We're seeing more horsepower. We're seeing better equities. Inflation really hasn't changed much in the last year or so.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, they're reacting to things that are not happening. And that's also true. Inflation, despite their thing about how, it went from 2.7 to 2.9, this is the end of the world. No, it's really not changed. It's basically remained the same, still with heavy tariffs happening, which, again, is a total contradiction. That's why I say, go back to April, play the tapes, look at what all of these people were saying, so that you can put on display how utterly wrong they were. Because according to their economic logic, apparently they believe this is how things work. If you put a 20-30% tariff, the prices should be going up 20-30%, right? Because Donald Trump's the worst man ever. Okay, do we see inflation anywhere near that? Do we even see inflation anywhere close to the 8%, 9% that we had under Joe Biden? No, none of this stuff is happening. And that's, of course, for a reason. But anyways, nonetheless, moving on from that, we just understand, again, these people are wrong and they just continue want to say, look, we're right. See, Trump's tariffs are destroying everything. Everyone's waiting. Okay, where's the evidence? Show us. Not happening. But with all of that in mind, I now want to show you how the Democrats, Chuck Schumer particularly, are reacting to this recent GDP announcement, because you would think this ought to be something maybe they just kind of shut up or retreat on. But no, instead, they're actually coping about it. They're claiming to us that the 3% GDP report is actually a bad thing. And still, again, these people who were so utterly wrong are still trying to say that they were right. So take a listen here for yourself, and then we're going to address the argument that Chuck Schumer is making, because despite their little panic about it, I actually find it to be kind of disingenuous. We'll show you. Take a listen.
And while the Trump administration will try to wave rosy headlines about the Q2 number, today's GDP number is in fact a mirage, because some ominous numbers lurk under the hood. Business investment plunged in the second quarter by 3.1%. The fact that business investment plunged so starkly is very troubling. It shows that already businesses are worried about growing their operations, worried about hiring more workers, worried about trading with their international partners, and worried in general about the future. And this number is another data point in a larger pattern. Donald Trump's tariffs are weighing down the U.S. economy, spiking costs for small businesses and families alike. And if Donald Trump keeps up the chaos, the dangers for the economy will continue to get worse.
I mean, that's just hilarious, right? Let me explain to you, the American people, why this good thing is actually a bad thing. With all of that in mind, let's actually address this, right? The question of business investment, because this is what the critics keep citing as the reason why this GDP report is basically fake. And when you take a look at the report here, again, 2.96 to 2.97% is the exact number here. It was driven by a couple of things. There was a increase by almost 1% in consumer spending, which is another telltale sign we're actually not in a recession, because people tend to spend less in that case, and people actually spent more in the second quarter. Okay. Government spending, basically 0%, right? No major change there. Exports went down a little bit, but, obviously, as they said there, business investment went down 3%. But because imports reduced, if imports go down, that actually adds to your gross domestic product, because we had less imports because of tariff policy. That's why they're basically saying, oh, the GDP numbers are fake. Here's a couple of things I want to note, though. Is first of all, let's address that very question of business investment. Why is that down in the second quarter? Well, I think, first of all, it's worth noting that a lot of this is driven, likely, just to speculate here, it seems like common sense, by uncertainty that you will not see in the third quarter. What do I mean by that? Well, first and foremost, the tariffs themselves, right? It's not necessarily that the tariffs were driving down investment inherently, but you remember back to the second quarter, this is the period between, I believe, April, May, June, around those times, right? That there was a lot of uncertainty around the tariffs. What's going to happen? Because you had Liberation Day and then you have negotiations. But ever since then, what have we seen in the month of July? Well, massive amounts of trade deals have been negotiated and finalized with America's trading partners. And so now it's predictable. Hey, what's the tariff rate going to be with the EU, with UK, with the Philippines, with Japan, countries like that? China right now is still on the table, but they're kind of, moving that forward. Okay. So that piece of uncertainty, again, a genuine reason why investment might temporarily pause is removed, okay? So you can't really say there's uncertainty around this stuff anymore because there's now certainty. That's number one. Secondly, though, another big thing to keep in mind here is the Big Beautiful Bill. The Big Beautiful Bill, which of course passed on the 4th of July, made some important factors like, what the tax rate's going to be, what government subsidies are going to be for certain industries. So obviously, yes, you kind of wait until that happens, till you decide to move forward with moving money. But thirdly here, another point I'd like to make, okay, if you want to talk about how the tariffs are supposedly weighing down the economy despite positive GDP numbers, I once again want to bring the question, what about interest rates? Because that has a lot to do with things like financing, obviously. And the entire world is essentially standing still, waiting for Jerome Powell to make a long-expected, too late move on the interest rates. That's also another reason why the uncertainty around this stuff is kind of stalling business investment. But with all of that in mind, even without Jerome Powell, a lot of that uncertainty is removed in the third quarter, so I'm not necessarily worried about that. Thirdly here, or fourthly, I should say, if you want to make the argument that, even though exports, formally speaking, do count as part of the GDP number, that's misleading, or it shouldn't be part of the GDP, to which I say, okay, so you mean to tell me that the neoliberals are now making the argument that GDP growth is not everything? It doesn't fully, measure the health of a country? Because I can remember for years, this is all they were telling us. But okay, all of that in mind, fine, fair enough. You want to say it's misleading because of the import number. Okay. But I'd also like to know that this GDP growth happens with government spending basically being reduced to essentially zero, right? 0% change, 0.8% change, basically, right? And simultaneously, when you look at the supposed GDP growth under Joe Biden, what do you think was primarily driving those numbers? It was government spending. Now, I would make the case, for instance, that using government spending to artificially boost GDP growth, obviously, is highly misleading, because that's not really new money being created in the economy. That's either fake money being printed or money that's already been generated, basically being dished out, and then you're redoing it as another form of this is the growth of the economy, when it's really not, right? But that's the thing. We got a positive GDP number without relying on government spending, which actually goes against a lot of, what America's basically had to rely on in recent years. So that's why I say, right, the supposed red flags they're talking about in the GDP report, I'm not super worried by, because again, I think that investment number sees massive reason to change in quarter three now that there's more certainty, and Jerome Powell could help out with that as well. But, consumer spending up, that's a telltale sign. Usually you're not expecting a recession. But again, government spending, if you can grow the GDP without relying on government spending, that's a positive, right? And again, if you're going to say imports shouldn't count, then I would say government spending shouldn't count either. But it is what it is. This is the definition of GDP. They told us this was the most important thing. So they have to own what happens when the GDP goes up. That's just the truth. So anyways, with that said, guys, again, no recession year. We're doing all right. Not the end of the world. These predictions, once again, were not correct. And this is all coming at the same time of positive benefits for the U.S., right? More jobs being created, incomes going up, inflation basically remaining the same, not changing basically at all there, and more revenue being raised for the United States, all basically of the benefits with very little downside. It's a good economic approach. It really is. They want to find reasons to say it's not, but it is. So with all of that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Do you agree with Trump on this? Are you more with the so-called experts who are saying there's warning signs in the GDP forecast? Make sure you go and check out our friends over at Fume. Link down in the description, sponsors of today's video. And until next time, guys, be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.